Hey everybody. It's week 11. No, it's week 10. I'm out of town, which is why I'm making this video for you. I even dressed up ahead of time just to be silly. So this week you're going to talk about Heclo. There's another video I've already posted for your discussion board about hybrid democracy. In this video, I'm going to touch on Robert Bellah, Crisis of Civic Membership, and Mascolo's is Radical Individualism, Destroying Our Moral Compass. This isn't going to be like I do in class where I do this whole spiel and tell this big story. I'll try to put it plainly to you. I think both authors at the outset are coming at this from a slightly more communitarian standpoint in some respects. So I'll lay the groundwork there. First, let's jump into the bigger of the two, individualism and the crisis of civic membership. Honestly, if you conceptually take Putnam and his Bowling Alone article and all the reasons why social capital is breaking down, and you marry it to the Etzioni article with his desire for more communitarian approaches and less focus on the individual, you might kind of get where this article is going. There are a whole host of things in the past that created networks and connections in society. Those old things are gone. The impermanence, the mobility, the lack of permanence when it comes to where people live or where corporations are headquartered, the fact that they can move around. Nobody is planted in the ways they used to be. And being planted in a place gives you a level of concern for that place, even if it's just economic. Look back to Oldenquist, right? He said something like that when he talked about people have a concern for what's theirs, their place where they live, where they operate their business, where they live their lives, have their families. In the end, one of the things that Bellah does, as well as what Sahil and Matthews suggest, is that government intervention, government assistance, government support needs to play a role in the disparities in society. So we have three different authors telling us that the government is the solution. So I'll leave you to it. It's not a complicated article. And again, it's reminiscent of Putnam, very reminiscent of Putnam in the article from week 1, as well as it's got a lot of flavor from Etzioni's communitarian argument in week 2. Now, let's just quickly move forward and not waste time. This is kind of an interesting one, and I think this also gets into a bit of a communitarian-esque discussion with his radical individualism destroying our moral compass. So here's his pitch. In the modern world, we are more accepting than at any time or place in history, more accepting of all the different ways of being there are for people. Your religion, your identity, and in recent times, far more recent when this was written, there are quite a few new additions to ways that people can identify. Just think of the TQIA plus movement. Right. And so the democratic experience has expanded. More and more people have gained a say in how society operates. We have become more accepting than before of all the different ways of being that can be seen as legitimate and of deserving of a place in society. Some of those things are still being debated. He says this is all good. But one of the things that happened on the way to this, you might call it postmodernism, you might call it relativism. It's the idea that if you have a pluralistic, diverse society with all these different ways of being, one of the things you have to stop doing is judging people. I'm reading between the lines here, but I think you'll see my point when you read through it. We really can't and don't judge each other anymore on most things like we used to. In fact, he makes a specific point here where he says, something not so funny has happened on the way to claiming our rights. It concerns what Haidt calls the great narrowing of moral frameworks. The range of issues we would call moral has narrowed considerably. There used to be a lot of things people would say, that's moral, that's immoral. We don't talk about that much anymore. And especially if you tend to be more secular or progressive, the idea of morality might smack of dogmatism or religious tradition, in which case you might not want any part of that. Keep your religious magic off of me and my body and my life. Where moral principles of liberty rights were traditionally accompanied by the values of public virtue, character, duty, community, and care, contemporary moral discourse tends to privilege individual rights as our primary moral principle. Radical individualism. To continue, the great narrowing has come at a cost. Here's the deal. If you live in a multicultural society that's quite diverse, and you've got all these different values and perspectives on what is good or real or true, what happens when they conflict? Who wins? It's not a small problem, right? The whole point of liberalism as a conceptual organizational principle is that we all agree not to fight over the fact that we disagree about a whole bunch of things. Like that's kind of what liberalism is. You have yours, I have mine, respect my rights, I'll respect your rights, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right? And we can just agree to disagree. And that's a good way to go about things for the most part. But our author here is suggesting that that can even go too far. Our solution has been to call for tolerance, respect for diverging viewpoints. However, while tolerance and respect acknowledge the limits of any single claim to moral certainty, they fail as a way of reconciling moral conflict. And so for those of you who were in class on Wednesday of week 9, when I talked about Haidt's pitch, one of the things he brings up is in some scenarios, more so in Europe, when it comes to immigration, you are facing the conflict of traditional, dogmatic, religious perspectives versus liberal, progressive, secular, relativistic perspectives, absolutism and relativism, butting heads. And it's not going well. And it can't go well. One side will have to win. Either you guys capitulate and accept our liberal secular structure, or somehow we over here will win and you will capitulate to our religious traditions and expectations and structures and limitations on personal behavior and gender roles and all that stuff. One side will win. You cannot have these two things in the same place at the same time. Won't work. Not for any period. So the problem is you can't just say whatever in perpetuity. There are certain things that can be tolerated side by side in the society, and we never have to worry about the conflict. Great. But there are certain things that do not function that way. And so his pitch, more or less, is we need to get back to a position where we actually make judgments and have a conception of what is good and bad in society. And here's the thing. It's whatever your society decides, but your society has to decide it. And it can't just continuously kick the can down the road and say, well, we'll talk about that later. Well, later is eventually going to come, and one side or the other is going to have to give way. And I think that's ultimately his point. He says this, at least for some further context. This leads to what might be called the great contradiction of contemporary moral life. On the one hand, we believe the right of people to pursue their own versions of happiness. On the other hand, the fact that something is freely chosen does not make it good, worthy, or right. You can be free to do bad or stupid things. If we all have the right to our own personal morality, radical individualism, subjectivism, relativism, right, postmodernism, then the right to choose freely easily degenerates into, if it's freely chosen, then it's all right. And that is not always true. And sometimes it's emphatically not true. Individual rights are essential for a free society. However, they are insufficient for a free and a moral society. And as Haidt mentioned in the article in week 9, humans have this deep-seated desire for a coherent moral order. So people can reject that, and you can reject traditional religious dogma all you want. That's fine. But there does need to be some overriding moral narrative that a society operates by. And it cannot be too disjointed, or it cannot be in conflict for too long, because that will get sorted out violently if it's not sorted out peacefully in the first place. Well, there you go. Don't give up your obligation to judge. Right? We don't like to be judged, and God forbid you judge someone else. That's part of living in a society. Sorry, suck it up. All right. Well, y'all take care, and maybe I'll see you in week 11.